Namaste to everyone. This is Saurabh Koshil from Smart Circuits Innovation Private Limited, your host for the day. And today again we have two very special guests with us. One is Dr. Ranjit Chaudhary ji and another is Mr. Mitul Dikshit ji. So welcome on our this live interactive session, sir. So let me give a brief, introduction about Dr. Ranjit Chaudhary, sir. So Dr. Ranjit Chaudhary sir is a urologist, andrologist, and laparoscopic surgeon. Dr. Ranjit passed out from the Scindia School, one of the most prestigious school in India, Gwalior, in 1993. He is an avid sports person, reader, and love to write. He is a urologist by profession and has earned numerous prestigious awards for his work. He got a mention in Limca Book of Records also in 2016. He is the only urologist from Central India to be accorded that honor. He has several international and national publications to his credit. He's also the part of the editorial board of the British Medical Journal Case Report, Saudi Journal for Kidney Diseases and Transplantation. So welcome Dr. Ranjit Chaudhary sir on our this live interactive session. And on the other hand, we have Mr. Mitul Dikshit sir, who is the chairman of Dikshant Group of Schools, Panchkula, Chandigarh. And he's also involved in a lot of other activities, just like a director of Chandigarh Literature Film and Literature Film Festival. And he's a kind of very innovative person, who love to do a lot of work in the field of different technologies, whether it is a medical, space technology, or artwork and all. So welcome Mitul Dikshit sir on our this live interactive session. So let us start this session with Dr. Ranjit Chaudhary sir. So, sir, we would love to know more about your journey, how you have started your journey in the field of this medical science from your childhood days to become a surgeon.
As you mentioned, I was at Scindia from 1984 to 1993. And I joined in class 4th and I passed out from Scindia in 93. Thereafter, I joined the Gandhi Medical College, Bhopal for my MBBS course. And after finishing MBBS, I moved on to the medical college at Jabalpur, the Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose Medical College. There I pursued a master's in general surgery from 2000 to 2003. And thereafter, from 2004 to 2007, I did my super specialization in urology from BJ Medical College, Ahmedabad. And for the last 13 years, I'm settled as a consultant and I'm practicing as a urologist in the city of Bhopal.
Welcome, Ranjit, and thank you, Saurabh.
Yes, sir.
Ranjit, I mean, in this conversation, there's a very special conversation for me personally because we've been together at school. And I have very fond memories of you, which I'm going to share. Besides, your intelligence, I mean, medical intelligence and academic intelligence. Tell me something that when I met you after a number of years, I mean, we were in school together. I want to know because I still remember that from grade 4th onwards till grade 11th. And I want, since there are a lot of school students also and people around, and it makes a lot of sense for me to ask you about this journey. Because for me personally, this change has been very, very inspirational for me in terms of the way you were at school. I'm very proud of your achievements, and we all knew that the kind of person you were at school also, that you're going to do well in life and you're going to do something big, as children we saw that. Can you take us through this change, the phenomenal change where you were all into books and topping? I mean, I still remember you've topped the class, the whole class, every year from starting from your journey at Scindia from grade 4th till grade 12th, second prelims. You topped the school every time. And when I said second year prelims, I still remember that you could not top the class 12th board exams. And I know the reason, and I would like to speak about that reason also. that was the second year we had uh, 4 sets of question papers coming in, and that was quite new for the change in the pattern of the board exams. And I still remember that the guys who were asked by the principal and their parents being called, to tell them that they would not be allowed to prepare to appear in the second after the second prelims in the board exams, because they ended up the maximum they'd scored in English was, one of them scored 8, that was his highest average, and the other guy must have scored 12. And this whole mix of set of English papers led you to score some 63 in English, if I remember correctly.
I think, yeah, it was 63, yeah.
63, and
63.
that was the reason that you could not top class 12 board exams. So, starting from there, what do you think? What went in your mind? That you were an academic topper all throughout, and grade 12 you could not top the exams.
Like, I'll start right from the beginning. Basically, I am from Lalitpur, and Lalitpur, as you know, is a very small place. It's barely a district, and it's a pretty backward region of like Bundelkhand. And my parents, like, they were earlier, like, they were practicing in the UK, and they came back and they settled in Lalitpur. So it was just like the education was pretty poor over there. So my parents, they just thought that let him appear for an entrance exam at Scindia, and they didn't expect me to clear it because I was very young. I was just 8 years old. So it was more of a kind of a trial kind of an exam. So they were not mentally prepared to send me to Scindia at such an early age. So as luck would have it, like, I wrote the exam, and I cleared it, and I got a admission letter from the school, and there was a huge dilemma back at home. Like, my parents, they were not very much interested in sending me there. So I distinctly remember that I was very much in favor of joining this school, because I thought that there would be a lot of my parents, they told me that you will get to read a lot of like storybooks and comics, and there would be a lot of other activities which you don't get to do at home. So my mother, she still tells me that when they left me in the dormitory, it was in Dattaji house. I was in class 4. Madam Khar was the house mistress. And when they were leaving me, so I was reading comics, and when my father asked me that should he go, like, so I, without even looking up at him, I said that up jaiye, like, you can go. So once he left, and then maybe like after a few hours, the reality actually dawned upon me that I don't have so as to say a family, because like later on everybody becomes a family, but at that point of time there was no parents, no nothing, like, so it was kind of a a cultural shock for me. And all I knew at that point of time was academics. And there were a lot of like guys from bigger cities, the so-called metros, and they were very extrovert, they were very outgoing. So I was kind of very introvert, very timid. I was kind of scared, and somehow it was again unplanned. Like I fared very well in the class test. It was not even a half yearly exam, so in the class test I got some very good marks. And somehow that thing just went into me. Like I could find a way in which I could get recognition and appreciation from the teachers. I got a lot of, so as to say, like a recognition. So my house mistress, she was very fond of me. So this kept on, this became a positive reinforcement. And since I was physically, if you would remember, I was extremely weak. Like I was a scrawny kind of a kid. Like I was tall, I was thin, and I was not cut out for physical activities. And somehow, like subconsciously, I started avoiding like playing sports, and I started devoting all my energies into academics. And if I were to look back at it, I was kind of obsessive in the sense that there was one teacher in mathematics, Sharma sir, Radha sir and Sharma sir. So I remember that in class fourth, like he was checking my the sums, like whatever. And at one point, I realized that out of 10, like one of them is like, one of them is having a slight error. So I literally like pulled the notebook out of his hands, and he was like, what are you doing? So I said that no, I want a clean sheet. I just don't want anything like red marked on it, like any question to be marked wrong. So that was in the nutshell how it was kind of an obsession that I wanted to do well. And in schools, like, good students, they get a lot of encouragement, appreciation. They get a lot of recognition, so as to say. So that kept on like multiplying throughout. Like I kept on winning like a lot of academic awards. But when you say that everybody knew that I would do well in life, then I would like to correct over there, because like being focused in only one direction is actually a recipe for disaster. I mean, it's like that person is actually not very likely to do well in life. So I would say that by the time I passed out from school, I was very good in only one aspect of life, and I did not know how to manage anything else. So sports, like if you forego sports, then what you are basically doing is that you do not know how to communicate, you do not know how to develop interpersonal relationships, which are of paramount importance when it comes to the fact of like, doing well in life. So after that, whatever exam I would sit in, like I would obviously clear it. But when I finally, sat down to set up a practice, then I had problems, and I had to make modifications in my personality. Only then, you can settle down professionally, and you can achieve like any bit of like success.
I mean, this part, where, how did you take it, not topping grade 12?
Yeah, I'll tell
And
you, like,
also,
I remember.
also in the first, and also in the first attempt,
Yeah, I remember,
not
actually,
getting through the PMT examination. What did you get?
I'll tell you the story about it. 12th, like I think it was a given that I would perhaps top. So in fact,
It wasn't perhaps.
in the
It
prelims.
wasn't perhaps.
Sorry.
It wasn't perhaps.
I mean, it was okay. Like, so in the prelims, like there is a story associated. In the prelims, like Upadhyay sir was the head, like in biology. So he gave me 100. So Upadhyay sir never gave anybody 100. So like Posti sir, who was the other biology teacher, he was extremely fond of me. And he said that later on in the boards, like I did well in biology. I don't know how much. I think I got 87. I got. So he told me that, if you would not have been given like 10% marks in the prelims, then maybe you would have done better in biology. So he was not very happy with the fact that I was given so many marks in the prelims. But actually what had happened is, the story is that there were 3 sets of the English paper, and the average in 2 sets was 56, and the average in the 3rd set was 81. So I belonged to the set in which the average was 56, and I got 63 in that. And the person like Tarun and like Aditya, who got more marks than me, like they were in the set which had 81. So okay, that is fine. So because of English, like I fell behind.
And I want to interrupt you over here. These guys whom I talked about, who were failing in their second prelims, and where the principal, Dr. Singh, at that point of time had called their parents that they would not be allowed to appear in the board exams. They went on to score went on to top English with 90, one of them scoring 96 and the other one scoring 92.
Yeah, it had something to do with the sets, perhaps. Like, I don't know, whatever. But I remember that I was in Delhi when the results came out, and I was supposed to like appear in perhaps AIMS or something like that. So when my father, he told me that, this is your 12th class result. Actually, I was 3rd. I was not even 2nd. So it was like, I still remember the feeling that I was terribly depressed, and it was like I didn't know like what to do. So the important thing is that everything is compartmentalized in life. Like, it is about the academics also. your 10th class result has nothing to do with your 12th class result. And similarly, your 12th class marks have nothing to do with the entrance exam that you sit for in your next exam, be it IIT or be it MBBS. So everything is like compartmentalized. But at that point of time, my brain was not mature enough to like process that. And for me, that failure was like, as if like it's a huge setback and like I have lost something. So I could not understand that, 12th class marks have nothing to do with the fact that I'm sitting for an entrance exam, which does not consider how well or how badly you have done in the class 12. So after so many years, like it's been like what, 27 years now. So you feel that, how stupid like you are, like when you still are not able to close that chapter, like maybe be it for like 6 months or 1 year. The moment you have given that exam and the moment the result comes out, like the thing, like the matter gets finished over there. It has no bearing on your future. And it is like if we would discuss, like I in fact ended up failing my master's exam also, MS surgery exam also. And I ended up like clearing my MCH exam also. So like every exam, like MCH and MS exams, they are not connected. It's like for a batsman, like every innings starts from a zero. So the net result of that innings depends upon how you've performed in that. It does not depend on what your score was, 100, 0 or 200 in the previous innings. So the maturity lies in the fact that once you have finished and once you have achieved the result of a particular destination, that destination is dead for you. So when you are looking forward at another destination, it is a completely new day. It is a completely new venture. It is a completely new opportunity. So if you let your past dictate your present, then your future is definitely going to be affected because of that.
I mean, to sum it up, it took you 27 years to realize.
No, I
to realize that your class 10th is not related to class 12th exams, because I still remember that I was very clear in my grade 10th exams that I only wanted to get a first division, and I managed to get some 60.7%. And I still remember throwing you out of my room.
Yeah, that's what you
remember that incident when
I was not studying in the prep. I was studying in his room. Basically, Mitul's father was a housemaster also, and like he's somebody like who is we like worship, and like he's very special to us. Like he exists for us, and we are very like indebted to how his family had treated like all of us, and in fact to everybody else also in the house. So Mitul being our batchmate, we used to spend a lot of time in his house also. And
let me complete my part, Ranjit.
No, I am coming to that. I am coming to that.
This session is becoming something like Arnab Goswami coming and interrupting and not letting the other person speak. No. So the story goes that I had commerce and Ranjit had biology. That was a medical stream, which you call PCB or biology. And his parents were doctors, so he wanted to be a doctor. Of course, there was no pressure from his parents about becoming a doctor, but it was always that he wanted to become a doctor. So the story goes that for me personally, it was more of I was a sportsman in school, and so it was just that grade 12th. You need to get a good percentage, a good score to get into the right university or the college. So it happened that, for us finishing off a full session of sports, there was not much time for us to, to get into academics. So it was just the last 1 month that, preparing for the board exams had started. And it was difficult, managing accounts and economics, because those two subjects were very important to scrape through or get good marks in. And English was the last priority. It was only just a couple of days before or in the gap that we would plan to prepare for English. And this guy, the time I started preparing, a month before, when I opened the books to prepare for my exams, this guy had started with his English revision. And I still remember there was a chapter called God is Near, where in literature, where there was a cat, there was a dog, and they had these diseases, and he would start psyching me about, asking me about, do you know about the disease, the cat was uh, suffering from, and the dog. And one day I realized that this guy is really psyching me, and I had to close the doors and tell him that, now you're not going to get inside my room, because, it becomes, imagine, a condition where you're trying to work out to get good grades in, your main subjects, uh, where passing those subjects is difficult for you. And this guy walks in and cites you about, a language, which you're only going to prepare for the last 3 days or in between the gap. So he had to be thrown out. And this was the case with us in even in the junior classes in, say, grade 10, where, they would try, these scholars who were extremely good in academics would try and come up with questions which we poor guys would not be able to solve.
No, no,
So
it
we
was
had to
not
find
deliberate.
ways. We had to find ways. Like, I still remember grade 10th board exams, mathematics. One day we decided, some of us decided that we'll try and get a question from grade 11, which these guys are not going to be able to solve, so that, at least next 10 days they would be looking to solve that question and stay away from us. So grade 12th, I still remember, when I had to throw him out of the room, lock it, and had to change my study timings. He would come after the mess, shouting at the window, Mitul, darwaza khol, tujhe jaan se maar dunga. Mitul, you can't do this to me. I mean, the kind of psyche which was there behind, the kind of, uh, fun. Of course, it was a fun time, but yes, we were the kinds, some of us were the kinds who knew very clearly in terms of that, look, grade 10, you managed to score a first division, that's 60% and above, you still remain in the same school. Grade 11th is a time for, to enjoy school and absorb, what is happening around. And grade 12th, yes, you have to get into the right college, so you have to work hard. So coming back to it, Ranjit, when we met after so many years, because, I'll come to your professional life after this, probably because this is important for school children also to understand that how do you plan everything that you do in life? How do you, I've read those, I've heard those stories about you, that you are a changed man, and you probably, if you were to live, and one simple question which would probably sum this up, if you were to go back to Scindia, or Scindia, what would be, if you were to go back to grade 4th onwards, join Scindia again, what would be the life you would like to live over there?
See,
You already spoken about the life you live.
yeah, see, this is a very interesting question. Actually, people, they ask me that what is the definition of a genius? So I tell them that if you keep on working hard in a particular direction, then invariably, like, most of the people would be able to do more than reasonably well. So what I'm saying is that if you have a unidirectional kind of a motive, that suppose I want to excel in academics, or if I want to excel in public speaking, or if I want to be a good sportsman, if you keep on doing it over and over again, then chances are that you would one day end up, like, in the maybe top 5 percentile. So for me, a genius is somebody who is able to balance things. Balance in the sense that, though you may not have realized it, like what you have actually described is the way one should be leading his life, that you should know that what is important at what given point of time. So your priorities should be such that they should be shifting over a period of time. So everything is important, like, academics is important, sports are important, making friends are important, and having a good time is also equally important as everything else which I mentioned earlier. So a person who can balance all these things would be somebody who would do well professionally, who would do well personally, and who would do well, like, socially. So if I talk about pure academics, then we used to have a subject like preventive and social medicine while doing an MBBS, in which the WHO, the World Health Organization, the definition of health is like, a kind of a perfect balance of mental, social, physical, and emotional like aspects. So that thing is important, because though my parents, they never like kind of pressurized me, or they never suggested me, or they never had any kind of a particular expectation from me. For me, the definition of success was like scoring big and like doing well academically. And I see a lot of parents like in which like the expectation is that the kid is like scoring like good marks. So when it comes to my own daughter also, my daughter she takes pride. Like if I ask her that what is your distinction in the class, so she says that perhaps I'm the best all rounder, and that actually gives me a lot of happiness, because she does whatever like academics everybody does, but apart from that she has a lot of extra co-curricular interests. So I think that at that point, when you are 7, 8, 9, to devote yourself exclusively to academics, it is not an easy thing to do. It is a very remarkable, it is an exceptional thing to do, because to have that kind of a focus, it's not an easy thing. But if you are intelligent, if you are like capable, then the true test of that capability lies that apart from academics, you are able to balance some other things also, that you can pick up a few sports also, then you can do some other things also. So that basically causes an expansion in the personality as such. Because what actually happened was that even when I went to medical college, I was again into academics, and I was a very focused kind of a person. So I didn't have a lot of friends. So that again, that again causes problems, like when you set up shop, when you set up a professional enterprise. So then you have to adapt, you have to change. So again, like as I have said, like it cannot be a unidirectional kind of a thing. You have to evolve in all directions equally. You have to expand if you want to have an holistic growth.
In between, Saurabh, would you like to
Yeah.
ask some
Yes,
questions?
sir. Actually, we have a lot of questions coming from students. So, I mean, along with your memories from the Scindia. So, let us take a few questions also.
Yeah,
So, sir,
Saurabh,
yeah, yeah,
what I suggest is you take questions in between,
yeah.
and in between, I'll also take questions and then run through a story also.
Definitely,
Okay.
definitely, sir. Sure, sir. So, doctor, we have a first question from our viewer Muskan from grade 8. She's asking, so what is it that you keep in mind before choosing the medical profession, and what are the skills required?
See, medical profession is not just having a knowledge about the subject. It's not about having the skill to be a good surgeon. Basically, you should be prepared to put in a lot of work in terms of like sacrificing your social life, compromising on the time that you're giving to your family. And if you are expecting a lot of returns financially initially, then perhaps this is not the kind of a profession. So basically, if you like doing that kind of a work, in the sense that you like treating people who are not well, and making a kind of a difference to their lives, which you actually can do, then perhaps medical is something that you should be looking at. Um, since the times have changed drastically from what the practice used to be from my parents' time, so it's not as rosy as it was maybe like 20, 25 years back. But I still believe that if you're looking at equilibrium in terms of earning a decent amount of money, if you're looking at a professional satisfaction, if you're looking at the respect and the recognition which the society accords, then this is perhaps the kind of a profession that you should be choosing for yourself. The other thing is that there are a lot of subspecialties in the medical profession. So depending upon your personality, because I believe that the personality of an engineer is completely different from that of a doctor, because in engineering, you should be able to like kind of an innovate. Until you are having a vision, if you're having a mind in which like, you know, you can create something which nobody has perhaps developed or envisioned before you, perhaps you would just be doing something which has been going on for several decades, and that will not distinguish you, and that will not give you any professional satisfaction also. Medical, well, you need to be intelligent, but you do not need to be innovative. Innovative in the sense like, you know, there are set patterns, there are set practices which you have to follow. You have to have a lot of perseverance, perhaps more than the intelligence part. And again, like in medical, as I said, that there are a lot of subspecialties. So depending upon your personality, you can choose like whatever you are comfortable with. What I'm saying is that the personality of a physician is completely different from that of a surgeon. In physician, perhaps you need to have a more like fertile imagination, because like it's your mind which works through a lot of diagnosis and a lot of probabilities when you consider what kind of a pathology the patient may be harboring. When it comes to surgery, of course, like you need to be intelligent, but most of the times, like, you know, there is a set pattern to the surgery that you're performing, and there are variations. There is always a variation when you're operating, because no two patients would be similar. But the nature of a job is different from that of a physician, in the sense that a surgeon is more like physical kind of a job. You need to be supremely fit. You need to have a lot of patience. You need to be willing to put in a lot of hard work. Then there are other subspecialties like radiology, like lot, like, you know, you can go on and on and on. So this gives you a lot of scope depending upon your personality. Which branch you want to settle in. So first of all, you must decide whether you have the kind of a patience and you have the kind of a hard-working attitude, and you are willing to wait for the returns to come, because they will come maybe after a decade, or maybe after 15 years of your practice. So if you are willing to put in that much of time and patience, then perhaps like you are suited for the medical profession.
Definitely, sir. So, Doctor, I have another question from you. So before that, I request all our viewers to please like and share this session, so that with your friends, so that maximum people will ask the question from Doctor. So, sir, I have a question from Dipanshu Babbar. He's asking, sir, he's suffering from polycystic kidney diseases. So he want to know, is there any treatment for that in any part of the world?
No, I don't know at which stage you are of the polycystic kidney disease. Polycystic kidney disease, it doesn't have any treatment per se. There is a progressive damage to the renal function. In some cases, it is very slow. In some cases, it could be a little more rapid. Some patients may not require any kind of an intervention all their lives. In some patients, the damage may be more rapid, for which they may require a renal replacement therapy. And there would be a subset of patients in which the cysts are so large that they stretch upon the renal capsule, for which we do a decortication to relieve the pain which is caused because of that stretching. So in short, the answer to your question is that there is no treatment per se. And if you are amongst the lucky ones in which there are no symptoms, and if the progression of the disease is not so rapid, then maybe you can go through your life without needing any kind of a renal replacement.
Ranjit, I have a question from some of our students at school. And the question is, sir, you are a urologist, andrologist, and laparoscopic surgeon. How are these three medical fields linked, and how are they different?
Okay.
And is there any specific reason for choosing urology? That's Shrishti, Arnav Sharma, and Vedant.
So basically, there are two parts to this question. First of all, urology is basically something which has a lot of subspecialties. A urologist can be only dealing with the stones. Okay, so you can have a subset which is only treating the urinary stones. Or there can be a urologist which only treats the cancer which are related to the genitourinary tract. So that is a uro-oncologist. Or you can have a person who deals with female urology, that is the urology problems in a female. So like this, there are about 10 to 15 like subspecialties of urology. So andrology is one of them. So I have done a subspecialty. So urology is a subspecialization. And in urology, there are further subspecializations. So andrology is one of them. Andrology basically deals with sexual dysfunction and male infertility part. So then we come to the laparoscopic. So laparoscopy is nothing. It is keyhole surgery in which like you make very small holes in the patient's body and then you put the instruments through it and you do the same job as you would do in an open surgery. So there are a lot of advantages of laparoscopic surgery. The recovery, the blood loss and the total time spent in the hospital, they are drastically reduced. So laparoscopy, like it is the most advanced form of surgery, and perhaps like in every advanced part of the world, in the better centers, laparoscopic surgery is the way to go. It is the gold standard as far as performing surgery is concerned. Why did I choose urology? Because urology is perhaps the only subspecialty in surgery which does not entail emergency surgeries. So most of our patients, in fact, 95% of the patients are elective patients in which you can choose the time at which the patient needs to get operated. So in emergency, like the patient can wake you up in the middle of the night and you may have to perform a surgery in the dead of the night, which is the case with the brain surgeons, with the cardiac surgeons, even the plastic surgeons, the trauma surgeons. So in urology, the biggest advantage is that we do not have emergency surgeries in 95% of the cases. So in that way, you are a surgeon, but you are leading the life of a physician in which you have a set timings in which you are supposed to like look after your patients. So that is the biggest advantage of urology.
Okay, another question which is there is from Ria grade 8th and Rabia and Manan. How was the experience of your first surgery? And were you nervous? And was it a successful surgery?
I do remember actually, the first surgery is never an independent surgery. So you will have your like seniors, like your second year, your third year residents who would be helping you out. In fact, they would be literally holding your hand when you operate. So when I talk of a major case, like there must have been a minor surgeries. Minor surgeries would be like if there is a small abscess in which you make an incision and then drain it. So there would be like many such. But if I remember about the first major surgery, it was about a peptic perforation. Peptic perforation means that there is a small hole in the pylorus of the, pylorus is the part of the stomach which connects to the duodenum. So there is a small hole over there. So that is a perforation. So my seniors, they helped me out. And I remember like it must have been like you feel thrilled, like you feel like as if you are the biggest surgeon in the whole universe. And like, there is nobody apart but you. So it's a heady feeling, like, you feel as if like you've climbed summited the Mount Everest, something like that. So the fate of that patient, I think after the repair, that patient had a minor leak. So it was not a perfect outcome. So we treated it conservatively, which means that we did not reopen it. So we allowed the small leak to recover on its own. So the patient maybe stayed for 5 days extra and he eventually went home. So it was, so as to say, a successful outcome, but not without a second complication after the surgery.
So, sir, I have one question from viewer Ria and Vinda. They are asking, sir, have any of your surgeries failed? How do you overcome the feeling of failure, especially when it linked to someone's life? So, I think it's a great question from.
It's about like
Yeah.
asking somebody. This is an aphorism also. Like if you ask a surgeon whether he has had a complication, and if the surgeon says that I've had none. So either that person is lying or he's not operating enough patients. So anybody who is operating upon a sizable number of patients will end up with complications. Complications are a way of life. Whenever we operate upon a patient, we explain all the possible things that can go wrong, including mortality. And in most of the times, like in 95 to 99% of times, there usually is no major complications. But yes, once in a while, maybe 2 or 3 times annually, you would come across when you have had an unexpected complication. So in my practice, I spend 90% of my conversation with the patient and the relatives happens before the surgery. So before the surgery, I spend a tremendous amount of time explaining to the patient what is exactly we are going to do upon that patient, what are the more probable complications, what are the rarest possible complications, and how the patient is going to fare in the post-operative period. So the art of being a good clinician is that you are able to predict the outcome as to how things would be once you subject the patient to a surgery. So I have felt that if you have covered in detail about everything that can possibly go wrong and how the patient would be after the surgery, most of the times, in fact 99% of the times, there would not be a problem after surgery. The problem arises when something unexpected happens for which the patient's relatives have not been counseled previously. What I'm trying to tell you is that you will come across a situation in which there is a very, very high chance of the patient not surviving either the surgery or the post-operative period. But if you tell the relatives and if you give them an option, all possible options that, my limitation is so and so, and if you want to take him to maybe a more advanced center, to a more equipped institute, then like it's your choice. So in that case, like when they make an informed decision, they would not trouble you and they will not question what you have explained to them before the surgery. So the transparency is extremely important, because in this era of extreme competition, sometimes we tend to overlook and not explain a few things which may tilt the patient's decision to perhaps get operated somewhere else. So if you look after those things and if you are 100% honest and transparent, chances are like there would still be a relative which may trouble you even despite your best intentions, but chances are that in most of the cases you will not have a major problem at your hands, on your hands.
So Dr. Navya is asking, if not doctor, then what profession would you have chosen for yourself?
I really can't answer that, because I think from a very, very early stage, maybe like since 7 or 8 years, like of my age, I have thought of nothing else but being a doctor. So I can really not give any kind of a manufactured answer to this now that, I am a fairly settled practitioner. So, I can't manufacture an answer to this that I could have been this and that. I really don't know what I would have been if I would not have been a doctor. And frankly, if you decide on something, like if you decide on doing something in life, and if you put your heart and soul into it, then personally, I don't see any reason why you should be looking at something else. So there can be a theoretical discussion, but if you want something badly enough, there is no reason, like if you put all your energies into it, that you will not be successful. In fact, if you think that this is a second option and third option, then perhaps you will end up not putting in all your efforts into that, and perhaps then you will not get to that goal. So in my life, I have never been in that situation where I have thought that I have decided to achieve something and I have had some like backup plans or something like that. So that situation has never arisen with me. So I really didn't have any backup or any second career option with me.
Ranjit, both your parents have been doctors. So how much has their influence of growing up seeing doctor parents has been on your career?
See,
and also the second part of my question is that do you still consult them for? Do you still take the advice and consult them for your medical profession?
See, my parents, like my father is a physician, my mother is an ophthalmologist. So I always say this, that when your parents are like medicos, then either you would be extremely motivated and inclined towards becoming a doctor, or you would be completely disillusioned and you would not be a doctor. So there is always an extreme outcome when your parents are like, or perhaps that goes with any profession. So because like when you're watching two professionals in your house and you are seeing what that kind of a life is, and then when you compare it vis-a-vis with maybe other parents' professions, then either you would take that call that this is the most wonderful thing that I would like to pick up, or you would develop a notion that this is the most horrible profession that anybody can perhaps pick up. So my younger siblings also. My sister is a dentist. My younger brother is a dermatologist. So maybe like that was a positive reinforcement. Like we all felt that perhaps this is a good profession. And interestingly, my parents, they never suggested us anything. They never said that you have to be like doctors. Maybe like at some given point during our schooling, all of us must have told them that we want to be doctors, and they must have been happy. Okay, then fine. Like you, there is nothing that we would want to dissuade you about. So that was how it was. And though I would say that, again, like that's a very interesting question that you asked, the second part of it, that I am basically a subspecialist. So the definition of a subspecialist is that a person who knows more and more about fewer and fewer things. So I am basically dealing with a very small portion of the human body, and maybe I know too many things about that human body. But frankly, Mithul, like, I'm on a public forum, and I would like to make a public admission that if you ask me that the dose of chloroquine for malaria, then frankly, I don't remember it, because I don't treat those patients, and I would not be able to treat him. So in contrast, my father, for example, he was practicing in the UK, and he came back, and he came back because of his parents, like, and he settled in a very, very small place, which is Lalitpur, and it was very small, like when he must have settled 40 years back. So when I was very young, I used to think that, he has made such a huge mistake that he has left London, and now he's sitting in like Lalitpur. So I had that kind of a complex that, my friends are like, they're sitting in Bombay, Delhi, and a few of my family members were settled in US also. But now looking back, I feel that my father, like, he has practiced there for 40 years. He has dealt with all kinds of cases like medicine, surgery, some orthopedics, trauma, everything. So he is what I would call a complete kind of a doctor. Like, this is the kind of a doctor which unfortunately is a vanishing species. You don't find such doctors anymore. Like, he's the kind of a person that the kind of a family physician, the person like you would see in like older movies, like the person who would deal with any kind of a problem. So yes, like he has had a wonderful career, so as to say. Like like his children, I hope he would say that he would look back and say that they have grown well. He has had a very satisfying family life, and I think that he made a correct decision. Like, coming back to his own country, he must have had a tremendous professional satisfaction, social satisfaction. So the question that you asked me, that whether I discuss, like, see, technically maybe about the kidney kind of a thing, I would know more than him. But practical experience, like how to deal with a patient, how to talk to that patient, how to deal with a situation, he is like, light years ahead of me. So that is very important to understand that, you may become, a scientists in the NASA, or you could be dealing with the most complex things in the world. But when it comes to the grassroots level, then things are like, a little bit different. So no matter, like, your qualifications are something different, and the old school experience is something different. So that is how, like, my parents, they are like that way. They are much, much ahead of me.
Also, I think that influence was never there. You see in this generation that a lot of children become doctors or take to the medical profession because their parents have these big clinics and hospitals which have to be taken over. But I think that was something which was not created for you, and you had to create your own space as far as the medical profession.
Yeah, exactly. Like, for me, it is like starting from a scratch. I'm not in the same city as my father. So that way I don't have any kind of a professional backing from my father. So you are correct about that, I'm in the process of setting up a hospital. So everything, like, begins from a scratch for me, like putting up that hospital, building the contacts, building a practice. So my father's practice is completely parallel as far as I'm concerned. I have never had a advantage in terms of, like, I have just taken over his practice. So I've never had that kind of an advantage. But there are several other advantages, but pertaining to your question, the specific question you asked, in terms of like professional lineage, so as to say that if your father is running a nursing home and then like, you take over his practice, I have never had that experience. And I've never had that advantage. But again, just as you are, like you have built everything from a scratch. So more than anybody else, you would understand that the kind of satisfaction, the kind of dedication, and the kind of happiness that you get at the end of it when you build things like when there is nothing to begin with, that experience is something like which cannot be compared with anything else. And the thing that you mentioned, it is an unfortunate part, because like once you have set up a hospital and it is a running hospital, then you do manipulate your children to follow the same profession, even though they may not be like willing for it. Though I know people like there is a pediatrician he's a leading pediatrician in Bhopal. So he has a daughter, and he has permitted, like she's a writer, she's pursuing some literary course in the United States. So that thing gives me a lot of belief, and that thing gives me a lot of hope that even though like the hospital that I'm setting up, even if it thrives and if it does extremely well, that should not be a binding on my daughter to follow in the footsteps. If she wants to be a doctor, it's great. Otherwise, like the essence of doing well professionally is that you have that much of independence financially and mentally to allow your children to actually be what they want to be, and they can pursue what they always wanted to. So this thing does happen in medical profession, and I hope that we can be mature enough and independent enough to allow our children to do what they are basically willing to do.
So, sir, here I have one
uh,
question.
okay, sorry.
Yeah. So, Sharna and Ria, they are asking. I mean, they have seen your TEDx talk, and in TEDx talk, you have mentioned that you are a shy person and you had a lot of mood swings. So, were there problem faced by you initially, as you have to deal with so many strangers every day? Is it tough? So, and Mitul sir, I also want to take a comment from your side also, because you are a batchmate, and
I hope, like,
so
I would let Mitul speak on it, like, because, like, instead of like speaking about what personality you have, it's always better to let the other person, because, like, you cannot evaluate yourself as well as the third person would. So I would like Mitul to speak about me, like what kind of a person I was at school, and like what kind of a dimension I had in terms of like personality.
Can you repeat that for
yes, sir.
me? Sorry.
Yes, sir. So the question is that, likewise, students have seen the TEDx talk of doctor, and in that TEDx talk, doctor mentioned that, I mean, you are a shy person, and you had a lot of mood swings. So, were there problem faced by you initially? So you have to deal with so many strangers every day. Is it a tough problem for you? I mean, he's a
Uh,
shy person, a lot of mood swings and all.
I think, don't know. I think Ranjit would agree with me that being brought up for almost 9 years in a boarding school, uh, and in a boarding school, it's been that the kind of personality what he was, in terms of being excellent in academics. He took to public speaking also. Somewhere the popularity in a boarding school is more for uh, kids who exceptionally well in sports and co-curricular activities. And to substantiate that, we've had instances of Anurag Kashyap, the filmmaker, who always talks about how he was a shy guy from a place called Banaras or Gorakhpur, where his father was posted, and he could hardly converse in English. And he was kind of bullied. You can't say bullied, but he found his refuge in the library, and there that's where he started reading Kafka and Camus and literature, where he got introduced, hiding himself in the library. Also, an example of Vikram Seth, the writer, who once mentioned, that when he went back to Doon, he was invited as a chief guest for the Founders Day at Doon. And he said, for years he did not visit Doon again because he felt that he was not a popular, he was not very popular at Doon, and he found his refuge in the library, and that's where his contribute. I mean, he contributes, gives contribute. Doon contributed towards his initial development of as a writer. So I mean, with Ranjit, I wouldn't say that he was shy in terms of because probably it wasn't something that the way you could express yourself at the sports field and around with popularity amongst people. But he was very sharp in terms of he knew from the beginning, because I know him well enough to know that when I put up this question about not being under any kind of pressure to become a doctor or probably take over a hospital from his parents. So he was very clear-headed and very, very sharp. And I think that fear was I never found that fear in him. Of course, shyness, probably you can't say that he might call himself shy, but I don't think he was shy, because he could be the best cheering best leader of the cheering squad at that point of time. I mean, cheering for all of us, who would play sports, and the analysis of the game was perfect. So it wasn't that he wasn't following the sport. So I think it comes from a good schooling background also, and the kind of exposure he went through. Ranjit, would you like to add something, Ranjit?
I will just break it down. I said something like, yes, I did say something like mood swings when I started my talk. So for the kids, this is important to understand that there is something that happens outside you and there is something that happens inside you. So what happens outside you is like, if you are a good speaker or if you're a good academician, so you get a lot of accolades and like you get a lot of recognition, appreciation from the society, from your teachers, from your peers at large. So that is something which is happening outside you. What is happening inside you is that somebody who has not played sports will not understand this concept. Even on days like when I'm extremely busy, and in particular on days when I'm not feeling well mentally, like if I'm feeling mentally fatigued, if I'm feeling depressed, on that particular day, I make it a point to exercise. So if you run for about maybe 5 kilometers on a treadmill, then, and again, like I'm saying that, somebody who has not experienced that cannot relate to it. So if you exercise vigorously, then basically the negative emotions in you, they just get flushed out. So that is something which you are engineering from the inside, like, that is something which nobody is seeing from the outside, but this is happening inside yourself. So there is one book like Dale Carnegie, How to Stop Worrying and Start Living, which I would advise all the young people out there, in fact, everybody who can lay hands on that book, to read that book. So there was one line that even if you are like, if there has been a bereavement in the family, if you have been bereaved, and if you are like, then after that, if you're playing, like, I think the corollary was to like playing a tennis match. Like if you're playing tennis, then you cannot think of anything else. So because when you're focusing on the ball, then you cannot entertain any other thought in your mind. So that is how the brain is programmed to be. It can only entertain one particular thought at any given moment. So if you're focusing on a physical activity, then all your woes, all your like tensions, all your so-called depression, these things, they get completely washed out. So this is something which I did not experience when I was in the boarding school. He's correct, like, because I would remember much more about the sports and about the matches the house team played, and what was the score and what was the opposition. I would remember much more than he would because he was playing, but I was like constantly, I was running on the sidelines. And I was like mentally involved in it. Then you would ask me, then why did you not play? I did not play because first of all, I was not, I had this notion that if I would give time to sports, then maybe my academics would suffer. And secondly, I was like physically not strong enough. The second reason is like not that important. So then it became a professional requirement because again, like if you see the thread of this conversation, then I have mentioned that, you know, even a physician and a surgeon, they have a different kind of requirements. Surgeon is more physically demanding kind of a branch. So when you are a surgeon, then you are expected to, and you are actually required to spend a lot more hours, like, you know, working, like, you know, standing, operating. So you need to be physically strong. And if you exercise after that, not only you get physically strong, your mental fortitude also, like it builds, like it becomes much, much more stronger. So talking about mood swings is like mood swings, the synonym is like mental instability in which there are a lot of thoughts going on and your mood is like fluctuating. So the how I control my thoughts, like nobody gets to control his thoughts completely. Like it's an ongoing process. It is something that you work on all your life. But there have been like close friends of mine who told me that, you know, the benefits of meditation, the benefits of physical activity. And I have tried all of them and I can vouch that, you know, I did not believe in like kind of meditation or anything like that. But all these things, they work. So once you get down to the brass tacks and once you get down to your profession, more than your intelligence and more than your like skills, which of course are important to sustain and survive and thrive, you need the mental strength. You need to be mentally stable. And unless you are physically active, unless you are doing things, therapy for your mind, therapy for your body, the chances are that maybe you would have a kind of a meteoric rise, but then, you know, eventually maybe you will crash land. In sports, like, you know, I follow a lot of sports. Like if I were to talk about school, like he would not remember, but I don't know if he would remember, but Mitul actually scored a goal in the finals. We were playing against Jayaji. Kunal Khanna was the goalkeeper. So he lobbed the ball like from the half line. And Kunal was perhaps standing a little bit ahead of the goalpost, and that ball it landed on. It landed inside the post. So we were leading Jayaji for most part of it, like 1-0. And I am sure like he remembers, but I remember everything so vividly. So I was coming to the sportsman part. So like I follow a lot of tennis. So like if you take the example of Borg, like Borg retired at the age of 25. And had he continued playing, he won like 11 Grand Slams. He won 5 Wimbledon and 6 French Open. So you never know, like if he could have continued, because like, you know, somebody like Roger Federer, he's playing at the ripe age of 38 and he's still like one of the elitist players on the circuit. So it's not just that, you know, he's physically fit and like he's supremely talented. It has a lot to do with the mental strength that even at the age of 38 and with two contenders like Nadal and Djokovic who are 5 years younger than him, he has that belief that, you know, he can still participate, he can still fend off the younger contenders and he can like, you know, still go toe to toe with Nadal and Djokovic. So mental strength at the end is, I think, it's perhaps as important, if not more, than your like professional skills. So that is very important, and this is something which is a neglected part of, you know, our armamentarium, like the curriculum, the way we raise our children, the way we train them. So it is very important. In fact, this is the last thing that I want to say regarding this question that you asked. My brother-in-law, he's in the army. So he tells me, you know, there is a psychological assessment board. So he says that, you know, if somebody is academically in 60, 65%, okay, we'll consider that person. But if we see a psychological flaw, if we see that he's mentally not strong enough, and like even if there is a shred of doubt, then we give the benefit of doubt to the institution, that is the army, and we would reject that person. So this is a very, very important person, because there is nowhere like in any profession where the responsibility is so huge. Because like, you know, if you are commanding maybe a company or maybe a battalion, whatever, like depending upon rank, like 700 people under your command. So, you know, the fate of those people, it rests on one decision of yours. So you have to be mentally spot on. So that may not be, your flaws may not be so magnified, the outcome of that flaws may not be so magnified when it comes to like civilian life. But again, like, you know, if you are mentally weak, then it will impact everybody, like not just you, but the institution that you are in. So it is very important, like this point is very, very important that I would like to stress upon.
Yeah, I do remember that goal, Ranjit, and I mean, it was like we had very tough defenders from the Jayaji house who were much more athletic than me and much tougher, you know, because I was very lean and thin at that point of time. So that was the time they were not allowing me to get inside the half line, and there was a moment, you know, where I saw the goalkeeper Kunal Khanna not looking at the game, and that was the time, you know, when he jumped before, you know, I kicked the ball. So it went inside, and he made this jump before, you know, there was, I saw his movement, and that's how that goal was scored. But coming back, sorry, I had to take that, you know, because that's a very, very important and interesting uh, uh, moment of my life. That was also a season where I scored 12 goals in that tournament, and we lost the finals finally.
Yeah, we lost in a tie break where, like, the craftiest of all, like Somen, he actually missed a penalty. Like, you know, he is somebody who would.
He didn't believe in practicing, and
but he was that kind of a person, like, who would score maybe 9 out of 10 times, and the only time he would not was at that point. So like that way.
Yeah. My next question to you is, I mean, I know that we might be running short of time, but very importantly, how do you think, you know, you're setting up a hospital of yours after so many years of working in a corporate hospital with corporate?
No, I never was in a corporate. I was in a freelancing kind of a practice. Never in a corporate.
But you were going to the corporates?
No. I never. There are no corporates in Bhopal, and though it's a different discussion, I don't like my ethos and my like, it's not very much in favor of like corporates, but that's a different discussion. So there are no corporates in the city, so I was never in a corporate hospital.
So how did you come? I mean, why did you set up your own hospital? Of course, we do want to set up our own because we have a vision about, you know, our profession, and we do.
So see, in most of the cases, the answer is that financially, like, I wanted to make a lot of money. That would be a standard answer. In my case, that is not the answer, because if you ask me personally, then maybe I should have been in an institute. I mean, like, I am somebody who is cut out to be in an institutional practice in a medical college, like maybe like AIIMS, SGPGI, PGI, or like Nadiad, in which there is you know, everything is like set. I just have to see the patients, I just have to operate, and I have to work on a fixed salary. So for some reasons, I did not join an institute. I came to Bhopal. There were no recognized or already established institutes. So I did not have that kind of a backing ever. So I was into a freelancing kind of a practice. I was associated with a private medical college also. But see, I was feeling that, you know, and it's the truth also, that I was not able to do what I wanted to do. In the sense that I'll just give you a small example, that when it comes to laparoscopy, you need a lot of armamentarium. You need sophisticated cameras, you need sophisticated energy sources. So there would be a lot of times when in a freelancing practice, the institution would not be having it. I would try to arrange everything, but sometimes it was not possible. So then you have to cut corners, and like, instead of doing a laparoscopic surgery, you would end up doing maybe an open surgery. So I think that that's an injustice to the patient, especially when you are trained, when you are skilled enough to do a laparoscopy. So I wanted a place in which, you know, I can put together all the things, and cost is not a factor to the patient. Again, I'll explain what I'm trying to say. That if you want to do a laparoscopy maybe for 4 or 5 hours, and if you do it in a hospital, the hospital runs up a huge bill to the patient. you may get a very small fraction of it, but the patient may then be reluctant that, if the cost of surgery is so high, then maybe I would not be able to afford it. So at the end of the day, there is no point in being trained in being if you have the financial means, then it doesn't make any meanings that if you're cutting the corners. So I wanted to put up a place where I can do what I wanted to do, what I am trained at, and in a cost which is reasonable to the patient. And even if you are running losses, then you can soak up the losses, maybe compensate it with some other surgery, maybe endoscopy or something like that, in which you can charge from the affording patient, but then you can transfer the money that you have earned from an affording patient to a poor patient. So it's not just if somebody says that I am not here to make any kind of a money, then he's obviously lying, because if you don't make money, then how do you make an enterprise work? Like, you have to have some kind of a profit so that you can put it back into the institution and to make it grow. So obviously we are looking at profits, but then you have to understand that the margin of profits that you're looking at, that ethos has to be in place, that you're not looking at something that I'm going to make this much, maybe a little profit to make the things running and to do the work which gives you a professional satisfaction. So that is very important, because you also understand this, that the kind of upbringing we have had, the kind of families we have had, we don't value our luxury in terms of the cars that we are driving or the kind of clothes that we are wearing. We don't show that kind of a thing off. But the work is something that gives us the satisfaction, the work that gives us recognition. That is very important to us. So unless you have a place where you can do as you please, and the ethos that you want, it is in place. So that was the reason why I ended up putting up a hospital.
So, Doctor, I have one question here from Neetu. She want to know why and how small bowel diseases like Crohn's diseases, ileostomy, short bowel syndrome is a risk factor for renal stone, mainly ammonium acid urate.
See, that is basically a malabsorption syndrome. So the intestine is supposed to absorb. There are different kind of segments of the intestine where the absorption of different minerals, it takes place. So in a short bowel, the equilibrium of that is disturbed. So the absorption that takes place is on the higher side, and that leads to the stone formation.
Okay. And one more question. Why cholecystectomy is more preferred than ESWL even in diabetes patient? What are the guidelines for using both the techniques?
Lithotripsy, ESWL against what? What was the first thing that you said? What is?
That is, I mean, it's a technical medical term. That is cholecystectomy, something like that. Yeah, that is CHO. Let me spell it because medical term
CHOLE
CHOLESTECTOMY.
No, I think the question here is wrong. Cholecystostomy is something else. Cholecystostomy is something to do with the gallbladder. Okay. Okay, I got the question. She's asking why the removal of the gallbladder is preferred to lithotripsy that we do in renal stones. Okay, yeah. So that way. So basically, ESWL is done for the renal stones, and the constitution of the renal stone is very much different from that of a gallstone. In the gallstones, the most common are the cholesterol stones and the pigment stones. Whereas in cases of kidney, the most common is the calcium oxalate stones. So the calcium oxalate and the calcium phosphate stones, they are amenable to fragmentation by lithotripsy techniques, and there are strict guidelines regarding that also. Like if the stone is more than 1.5 centimeters, then rather than lithotripsy, we would do something else. So the nature of the stone which are found in the gallbladder do not make them an ideal candidate for a lithotripsy vis-a-vis a case of a renal stone. So that is why we, if there is a patient in which there are stones in the gallbladder, we would rather remove the gallbladder, which is cholecystectomy, as against the lithotripsy, which is ESWL for renal stones.
Okay. And so Shakshi is asking, everyone is saying doctor is not an easy profession, but right now so many students are opting this line and moving abroad for studies. What do you think, how they can manage to cope up all that things in India because of MCI?
Okay, see, medical is a very difficult profession as we have outlined. So you have to have a proper counseling and you have to have a very hard look at your personality to embark before you embark upon this profession. So that is a separate thing. The second thing is that people go abroad, people go to Russia, Ukraine, China to obtain a medical degree over there. And that used to be a shortcut because like earlier the entrance exam in India used to be more difficult than the entrance exams in these places. And this was more or less a capitation course in which like it's kind of a, like you pay the fees and they would admit you. So now the MCI has made it mandatory that once you do a qualification from a place which is overseas, you have to come back and you have to appear in a qualifying exam in India also. So this is to maintain the standardization, which is in parallel to the American system. The American board asks you to clear an exam, which is the USMLE, that is the Medical Licensing Exam, United States. So it is a correct step in the sense that there have to be some minimum requirement or the minimum standards beyond which you would be awarded a degree by the Medical Council of India. So like if the place from which you are doing is substandard and if they are not training you properly, it may be difficult for you to clear the exam over here. So that is one. Secondly, the kind of patients that you see maybe in Ukraine and China, they may not be having the same disease profile and they would not definitely not speak the same language as they would back home. So there are that problems also because the kind of presentation those patients will have, the kind of training you will get over there may not be the same that you would get in India. So these are two major problems: the kind of training and the necessity to clear another exam when you come back to India. So you have to factor all these in. I would say that there is a multitude of medical colleges which have come up in India, and Medical Council of India have recognized so many colleges, and the government is planning to open so many new medical colleges. So if you work hard enough, it should not be a problem getting a MBBS seat in India itself. So you should be primarily thinking about that.
My question, the last of the questions from me personally. What is your advice to students who are preparing for medical? The second advice is for everyone, all the students, who might not be preparing for medical, but who are students. What is your advice to school going students? Advice in terms of, how to live your school life, and for medical students, of course.
See, Mitul, my answer may not be something which is a popular answer actually. You know, and again, like it's like to each his own. I would say that there is a lot of paranoia amongst the parents that the child must start preparing as early as possible and so on and so forth. Like being an educationist, I am sure that you understand that. In fact, there is a running joke like, the mother of a child, he asked the other mother that my kid is in like fourth class, how he should be preparing for the IIT exam. So the other mother answered that, he's pretty late. In fact, like he should have been preparing in utero, like anything like beyond that is like late for an IIT exam. So that may not be the actual situation, but it borders on that, regarding the IIT, regarding the MBBS, there is a paranoia. People feel that, the earlier, the better. They start like all this, like, I don't know what Shah Rukh Khan also endorses that, Byju's and all that stuff, like Byju's for class 4, Byju's for class 5. I'm really not sure about that. I'm really not comfortable with that. I would rather like, my daughter, I would rather, have her enjoy her life before finally, she reaches a stage where she has no other option but to work hard, like, because that stage will come in everybody's life. As you said, like, in 11th you can enjoy, in 12th you have to study. You have that maturity. So you have to let the child grow up. You cannot force things upon him or her from class 5th or class 6th or maybe like class 7th or class 8th. So basically, the basics should be in place. Like, the basics should be like the child should be disciplined. Like, this is what you teach in a boarding school. The basic difference between a boarding school and a non-boarding school is that the child knows how to maintain his own affairs, at what time to get up, how much to eat, what time to play. So the child should be taught how to manage his own affairs, like to live a disciplined life, to focus on like whatever he or she is doing. Like if she's sitting for studies, like, to focus in that 1 hour. There is no point in having a child who is sitting for 3 hours and the output is the same as like you would get out of half an hour of like focused work. So once you've had that kind of ethics, like you have drilled into that child, then after maybe like 7th or 8th class, that should not be a problem. After 8th class, you have to see what is the aptitude of the child, whether that child is fit enough. Fit enough means like, it requires equal amount of skill and intelligence to be anything, like to be a filmmaker or to be a medical professional, to be an engineer or to be a whatever, like to be an economist. You require intelligence. But you have to see what the interest of the child is. Suppose if the child is not interested in becoming a doctor, and if you make a doctor out of that child, he would turn out to be a horrible medical practitioner and he would be unhappy all his life. So those things are more important. So you have to see, you have to allow the child to go in the direction where he is like supposed to go. Once that happens, then maybe in 9th or 10th, you can, you can have some other aids, like, some concerted, like some, maybe some coaching or something like that. I would say that even 10th is a little bit too early. Then in 11th and 12th, like once you have decided upon the branch, then you can have a focused kind of an attention to that. Again, in a boarding school, the question which I didn't answer, which you asked me, is that how did it feel when I didn't clear the pre-medical test in the first attempt? See, it's very difficult because in Scindia, we did not have any kind of an orientation to that. So I took a crash course. I studied for 40 days in that. And I was in the waiting list when I was not getting a good college. So I declined that year. So what I'm saying is that even in 11th and 12th, you may or may not have an environment. If you are in a boarding school, then maybe you would not have that kind of an orientation for an entrance exam. Even that doesn't matter. So even when you pass 12, then maybe you can take a drop. You can take 1 year like or concerted like coaching in that direction. And like, if you have put in the hours like before that in your schooling years, you should be able to clear that exam. So that should not be a problem. So the kind of anxiety and the kind of paranoia which parents have regarding whether the children will be able to clear the exam or not, I think if the basics are correct, if you know how to approach a problem, a mathematical problem or a problem of physics and chemistry, like if your basics are right, then when the time comes to up the level, the child would be able to do that.
Thank you. That's quite a perfect answer because, in especially in the day schools these days, and it was quite a shock for me, looking at the education, imparted by schools and the system where, after grade 10, schooling would somehow, end with children being divided into various streams and taking up the coaching centers. You would understand, the concerns of all these coaching centers where they prepare children for 2 years in 11th and 12th for medical as well as, IITs and engineering colleges. So thank you for that answer. And
I'll just interrupt. Like, the simplest way of answering this question would have been if you would have asked me that if given an option that if you would have left after 10th and maybe would have gone to some like coaching institute and would have cleared the entrance exam in your first go, would you have taken that, or would you have taken the scenario which you did, that you stayed for 2 more years at Scindia, like you spent your 11th and 12th and then you had 1 drop? So when you live your life for 70, 80 years, does that 1 year matter? Or was the 2 years that you spent at school, were they more important? So therein lies the answer to that question.
Yeah, I certainly agree with you because those years, I think 11th and 12th for you also, there was so much that probably you realized and learned during those two years, because that's the time most, I don't know what is the age of maturity these days, but I think in our case the maturity came during that time, and it was important living those years rather than struggling to get into the professions. uh, Saurabh,
Yes, sir. So let me quickly take last two or three questions from Doctor. So, sir, I have a question from Siddhant. He want to know uh, in the changing food habits and lifestyle of people, what new heights will urology be reaching, and what suggestion would you like to make to cope up with the forthcoming diseases?
Um, uh, uh, I actually didn't understand the question, but this seems like a kind of a preventive medicine kind of a question. So you see, like I was talking to somebody in the morning, so I said that anything which is closest to nature, like in terms of food, whatever is closest to nature is something that you are like, you're supposed to consume. So talking about like sugar, like you have refined sugar, you have processed sugar, you have a fruit juice, and then you have a fruit, right, which is plucked from the tree. So the closer you are to the source, the healthier it is. So right now, the lifestyle has become corrupted. The kind of food that we take has become completely adulterated. So that is the reason why the incidence of not just the urological diseases, but all the diseases and the cancers per se has gone up. The incidence of cancers is much higher in the urban areas as compared to the rural ones. The reason is that those are the people who are like closer to nature. And I always say that, once you age, you would understand the most important thing that you have to prioritize in your life is health. You may be running a multi-billion-dollar enterprise, but if you're not healthy, you would not be able to partake the fruits of your like hard work into it. Just to like it's when it comes to the Apple, like so Apple had basically three partners. Like everybody knows about Wozniak and Jobs, Steve Jobs, the two Steves. But there was a third person by the name of Mr. Wayne. So Steve Jobs, like he wanted like Mr. Wayne, he was a senior person to be a part of it, and he was a partner. He had a 10% share, and somebody on WhatsApp actually he forwarded like if he returned his 10% stake, which amounted to maybe a few $1,000s at that point of time. So the whole comment was that had he continued with that, then the 10% share of Apple today would have yielded this much amount of money, and there were a lot of zeros like after that. But that is one way of looking at it. The other way of looking at it is that Steve Jobs unfortunately lived maybe, I'm not sure, but he lived maybe 45 or 46 years. Like he was one of the sharpest guys. He was one of the richest guys. But unfortunately, he was struck with a malignancy, with a cancer that consumed him. So again, like, if I give you the option that would you like to be Steve Jobs and live for 45 years, or would you like to be maybe like, somebody who's reasonably doing well in his profession, who's living a healthy life, who has healthy social relationships, who has a healthy family? I'm not sure. Maybe a young person would say that, I would like to be a blazer, and I would just like 45 years and I would like to be on top of everything. Maybe a older guy, maybe who's in his 40s, he would say that maybe I would like to be Mr. Wayne. I would like to be healthy. I would like to have a family. I would like to have friends. I would like to have healthy, like social connections. I would like to live my life more. So it depends on like, what we want out of life. But if you are not healthy, the bottom line is if you are not healthy, no matter whatever you're doing, first of all, you would not be able to perform. And even if you perform, you would not be able to enjoy that. So that is most important. So you have to eat healthy, you have to exercise, you have to sleep on time, you have to meditate, you have to have a fixed schedule. So this is the basics that, whatever your parents told you when you were a kid, and you kept on forgetting that, and you kept on like, becoming something else, and living a life that you were not supposed to. So that is something which is unhealthy. So go back to what your parents told you. And I think that is the best
Definitely.
that you can do.
So yeah, so one question is from Jasween Kaur. Who was your role model?
See, the role models keep on changing. Actually, when you're young, then your parents are your role models. When you grow up, then you start questioning their authority, and you think that whatever they are saying is incorrect. When you age, when you are in your 40s, then your parents again become your role model. So these things, they keep on shifting. Then your teachers are your role models. So there were so many of them, like whom I really used to look up to, including like Mittal's father. He was a housemaster. So these people have impacted you at with varying like magnitude at different points in your life. So there is not one single person that I can name. You draw inspiration out of everything out of your life. As I said, like I follow sports. Roger Federer is my role model. Like I admire him. I adore him. Like so, I take so much out of his own life. So there are a lot of my friends that I look up to. So basically, you cannot have one fixed role model. You have to understand that even the worst of people will have certain qualities that can turn around anybody's life. So you have to develop a vision in which you're looking at the world, you're looking at people around you, and you are picking up that one quality in them which can transform your life. So, in a sense, everybody, if you have that vision, is kind of a role model.
I think
So, sir, yeah,
one last question,
yeah,
Ranjit. Uh, let's make it the last question.
Sure.
sure,
Uh,
sir.
one last question. What do you think, is the situation of COVID-19 in India?
Okay.
And how do you think, how well are we coping with it?
Well, if I may, I would take a little bit of time to answer this because this is a very pertinent question, so as to say. And I would like to maybe highlight a few points which may be of use to people. The situation is not good. Like the situation is uh, alarming, so as to say. We are not anywhere near the peak of the cases. The peak of the cases will come perhaps in mid-July or at the end of the July. So you have to understand that the cases that are being quoted by these sources, we actually have far more cases than the ones which are being quoted by the government. The testing which is being done in India is inadequate. It is much less than what is being done in US and Europe. We don't have any cure for this disease. So that is the other thing. The social etiquettes that are prevalent in India are far from optimum. Like, from 1st of June, in fact, when I was going out, like, I could see people like who were roaming around as if there is no trace of any disease in the community. So people have become kind of relaxed. They feel that the threat doesn't exist anymore. You have to understand that the government enforced a lockdown, and now for economic reasons, it is not possible to extend that lockdown. But it doesn't mean that the lockdown having been relaxed means that the disease has vanished from the community. In fact, it is at the stage 3, that is the community spread, which is a very dangerous point that we have approached. So by the lockdown, we have delayed the curve, but we have not been able to flatten the curve. So now the curve will actually go up, and it will go up exponentially. I have a lot of my friends who tell me about the situation in Bombay. Like, it's so as to say, like, if you have a sick patient, it may be very difficult for you to get a ventilator or to get admission into a hospital. So having said that, you have to understand that this disease in majority of the cases will not be extremely serious, like particularly if your immunity is good, if you are young. But in some percentage, and that percentage means the elderly population, those who are immunocompromised, that is cancer patients or diabetics or hypertensives or suffering from any form of chronic disease, this disease can take very serious dimensions and can even be life-threatening. So we have to specially protect the elderly in our families, and then it's a kind of a chain reaction. If I'm going out and if I'm coming back to a home where my parents are also staying, then maybe I will be contracting a mild form of disease, but I would be the cause of friend who's close to me. I can transmit the disease to that person, and from that person it can go to that person's parents. So all these things which the government has implemented and perhaps trained us, like usage of a proper mask, usage of sanitation, frequent washing of hands, and maintaining an optimum distance. 2 meters, I would say, if you are in a if it's a windy kind of a place, then even 6 meters can transmit the virus. There is enough documentation for that. So until we find a vaccine, and personally I feel that the vaccine will come by the end of this year. Don't ask me why, but I have a feeling that it will come from China by the end of this year. So once the vaccine comes, then maybe we would be able to take care of this problem. But even if we take care of this problem, you can be assured that maybe next year or year after that we will have another pandemic, because that is how we have manipulated and we have exploited our environment. So no trees, usage of indiscriminate usage of air conditioning, ozone holes, population explosion. So there is a limit to which the environment can sustain the humans. And when it goes beyond that, as it is happening in current times, the environment will get back at you. So you have to understand, not just maintain a healthy lifestyle, you have to care for the environment also. And if you don't do that, then earlier we used to say that the coming generations will pay the price. I can see our generation itself paying the price for it. So let's just hope for the best, and let's hope that we get out of this with the minimum possible damage.
Thank you, Ranjit.
So, sir, before we conclude this session, on a lighter note, I have a last question from my side. So, Ranjit sir, हम usually देखते हैं कि जो डॉक्टर्स की हैंडराइटिंग होती है किसी को समझ नहीं आती। ऐसा क्यों होता है कि पेशेंट को पता ना चले कि क्या आपने लिखा है, क्या डिसीज है? तो उसके बारे में थोड़ा सा जानना चाहता हूँ।
मैं ये कह नहीं सकता हूँ, शायद लोगों की बहुत सारे मरीज ज्यादा रहते होंगे, है ना, तो बहुत ज्यादा आप मरीज देखते हैं तो जल्दी जल्दी लिखना पड़ता है। मेरी हैंडराइटिंग, मैं खुद की वैसे तारीफ नहीं करूंगा, लेकिन मेरी हैंडराइटिंग अभी भी बहुत अच्छी है। लोग मुझे बहुत तारीफ करते हैं हैंडराइटिंग के लिए। शायद उसका एक कारण ये हो सकता है कि मेरे मरीज बहुत कम है, लेकिन उससे बड़ा मुझे ये कारण लगता है कि मुझे लगता है कि जो भी आप करते हैं उस पर आपकी एक छाप होनी चाहिए। छाप का मतलब ये है कि अगर आपकी हैंडराइटिंग जैसी होगी, मुझे लगता है कि जिस दिन मेरी हैंडराइटिंग खराब हो जाएगी उस दिन शायद मेरी सर्जरी भी इम्पैक्ट हो जाएगी। तो हर चीज का ये इम्पोर्टेंट पॉइंट है कि जैसे अगर आप किसी if you talk about some cricketer, then it's just not about how he behaves on the crease. It's about he pads up, the rituals that he does before going into the ground. मेरे लिए वो इम्पोर्टेंट है, मेरे लिए वो सब कुछ इम्पोर्टेंट है कि आपकी जो हैंडराइटिंग से लेके आप मरीज के सामने आप कैसे खुद को प्रेजेंट करते हैं, आप क्या कपड़े पहनते हैं। जैसे हम देखते हैं कि जो यंग डॉक्टर्स हैं, जो ट्रेनी डॉक्टर्स हैं, शेव नहीं कर रहे हैं, चप्पलों में आ रहे हैं, जीन्स में आ रहे हैं। तो मेरे कभी किसी एक टीचर ने मुझे बोला था कि भाई कपड़े जो, इनफैक्ट टीचर ने नहीं, मैं आपसे एक कहानी मैं बताना चाहूँगा। मेरे फादर ने मौलाना आजाद से MBBS किया है, तो मेरे फादर अपने बारे में बताते हैं कि मैं बहुत अच्छा स्टूडेंट नहीं था। तो एक एक्सटर्नल आए, बाहर से एक एग्जाम लेने आए मेडिसिन के, वो बड़े दुर्दांत थे, मतलब वो बड़े ही स्ट्रिक्ट थे और उनका जो फेल करने का रेट था वो बहुत ही खतरनाक। तो वो क्या है कि कॉलेज के बाहर एक भिखारी को पकड़ लाए, है ना, और उन्होंने उसको एक केस की तरह उसको बिठा दिया, जिसको भिखारी को बहुत सारी जो है वो प्रॉब्लम्स थी। तो उस बैच में जो है वो 80 से 90% बच्चे जो हैं वो फेल हो गए, टॉपर्स तक फेल हो गए, लेकिन मेरे पिताजी पास हो गए। क्योंकि उसका कारण ये था कि मेरे पिताजी जो हैं वो उस टाइम और अभी भी वो अपने रहन सहन और कपड़े पहनने पे बड़ा ध्यान देते थे। तो वो शायद उन बहुत कम लोगों में से थे उस दिन जो शेव करे हुए थे, उन्होंने कपड़े एकदम साफ इस्त्री कलफ लगाया हुआ उन्होंने पहना हुआ था। तो एक्सटर्नल ने उनको ये बोला कि बेटा तुमने जो बताया है वो तो ठीक है, वो मुझे नहीं पता कि मैं पास करूं, लेकिन तुम दिख डॉक्टर जैसे रहे। तो अगर मरीज तुम्हारे पास आएगा तो उसकी आधी जो बीमारी है वो वैसे ही ठीक हो जाएगी, तुम्हें देख के उसको विश्वास हो जाएगा कि तुम डॉक्टर। तो मुझे लगता है कि हर चीज पे जो है वो इम्पोर्टेंट है कि आप दिख कैसे रहे हो, आप बोल कैसे रहे हो, और आपकी लिखाई भी इम्पोर्टेंट है। तो ये बहुत छोटी छोटी चीजें हैं, लेकिन छोटी छोटी चीजों से ही मिलकर जो है वो एक चीज जो बड़ी बनती है। तो
और सौरभ दूसरा, हमारे स्कूल में, सिंधिया स्कूल में सबसे बड़ा जो क्राइम था
वो
हमारे
गंदे जूते
प्रिंसिपल के
था।
लिए, कि अगर हम हॉस्टल से भी अगर बाथरूम स्लीपर्स में बाहर निकल जाते थे तो वो फटाफट बुला लेते थे। बाकी आप करो, कुछ भी करो, लेट हो कहीं पे या वो, तब भी आप निकल जाते थे, बट आप हॉस्टल के बाहर बाथरूम स्लीपर्स में नहीं निकल सकते थे।
इनफैक्ट
So, I mean, that's what we were.
साजन फिल्म में एक वो गाना है या कहीं पर एक पॉइंट है जहां पर सलमान खान जो है वो अपने जूते जो है वो अपने ट्राउजर से ऐसे पीछे ऐसे क्लीन करके जाता है वो लड़की से मिलने। तो लोगों ने उस टाइम बोला ये सिंधियन ट्रेट है कि आपके चाहे कुछ भी हो लेकिन जूता जो है वो गंदा नहीं होना चाहिए। सो दैट इज हाउ वी यूज्ड टू क्लीन, लाइक फ्रॉम द बैक ऑफ आवर ट्राउजर्स। तो
Yeah, definitely. So it was really an, I mean, sir, आपकी interesting journey रही, and about the medical field, and also thank you very
my
much for being
pleasure.
with us today and share your story, journey, and questions of our viewers. And thank you very much, Mitul sir, for being with us today.
Thank you,
So
Saurabh, for giving this
I ask
opportunity
Mitul sir to
to.
please
Thank you,
conclude. Yeah.
Saurabh, for giving this opportunity to connect with this genius schoolmate and classmate of mine, and reminding us
No,
of
no, no,
many
always a pleasure.
moments.
Always a pleasure.
Reminding me of more moments, where we've grown up as childhood friends and grown together. Thank you, Ranjit,
Thank you so much.
for
Thank you, Mitul, for having
spending so
me.
much
It's
of
always a
your
pleasure.
valuable time. Thank you so much.
Thanks a lot.
Thank
Thank
you,
you so much.
thank
Thank you.
you, thank
Thank
you.
you. Thank you.
Okay. So thank you very much, our viewers, for attending this session with Dr. Ranjit Chaudhary and Mitul Dikshit sir. So once again, thank you to everyone, to our viewers, and it's a small announcement for our viewers. We are received more than 1,500 consents for robotic courses, space technology courses, and electronic sensor technology courses STEM module. So if you are interested in any of our course, you can book a free trial on our website or on from our Facebook page, or you can contact our team member at any time, and you can take a free demo from our side regarding robotics, space technology courses, and more than 100 plus students have already enrolled for our online courses with us. That is a robotics basics course, robotics advanced course, space and technology course, STEM module, electronics and sensor technology, aero modeling. So if you are interested, you can write to us at any time for a free demo, book a free trial, book a free demo today itself, and you can go to our website, that is smartckts.com, and you will get to know about all our courses from our website and be the part of this innovative series of courses. And you can get back to our team member at any time. You can write to us on a WhatsApp, or you can write to us on our email ID or a Facebook, and be the part of online courses, you know, by Smart Circuits Innovation Private Limited. तो स्मार्ट सर्किट्स इनोवेशन प्राइवेट लिमिटेड ने बहुत सारे इनोवेटिव कोर्सेज लॉन्च किए हैं, जिसके अंदर रोबोटिक्स है, जिसके अंदर रोबोटिक्स बेसिक्स है, रोबोटिक्स एडवांस है, स्टेम टेक्नोलॉजीज कोर्सेज हैं, स्पेस एंड टेक्नोलॉजी कोर्सेज हैं, एरो मॉडलिंग, एस्ट्रोनॉमी कोर्सेज हैं, एंड गेमिंग कोर्सेज हैं, पाइथन कोर्सेज हैं। और अगर आप लोग इंटरेस्टेड हैं उन कोर्सेज को ज्वाइन करने के लिए, तो प्लीज हमें व्हाट्सएप कीजिए। यू कैन व्हाट्सएप अस एट 8295444079 also, or you can also go to our website and you can select any course and schedule your free demo. आप अपना free demo schedule कर सकते हैं. If you like the free demo, only then you can register for that course. And we have a limited batches for all these unique courses with us right now, and already 1,500 plus students have sent us a consent form, and from that around 100 plus already enrolled, and still the demonstrations are going on. So if you are interested to be the part of these courses, you can write to us at any time and share this video with your friends, like this video, as well as like Smart Circuits Innovation Private Limited page for more updates and more information. So thank you very much. And on this Saturday, we are coming up with Ritesh Shah, who is the script writer of movies like Airlift, Pink, so these type of movies. And in addition to that, we are also coming up with a technical live session related to 3D printing technology, electronics and sensor technology and robotics technology soon. So stay connected with us, stay tuned with us. Thank you very much. Be the part of Smart Cities Innovation Private Limited live sessions. Thank you. Have a nice day. Goodbye.